110 I won. Okay.
Okay. Kum lernen a blatt geworden, Shvua Tov, Shvua Tov, good Woch. Mit zwei Shabbos, Kodesh Par, mit Vorchim, Tammuz. We are up to Daf Kuf Yud Amud Aleph. We'll start from the very top, even though there's a few words in the previous page. Just to briefly remind you what's going on here. Rabbi Gamliel said that the girl was a katana, then basically that she has to wait until if she didn't do the miyun, because her sister-in-law is an adult, but and she's married to the brother. If she did not do the miyun, she didn't walk out of the marriage, then we wait until she grows up. And then the other Yevama can walk out because she is the sister of, of a married woman. So we had a question. What happens when she grows up? Is it automatic at the age of 12? She becomes now married Mahatoida? Or is it only if you had Bia, again, if you had relations after she was an adult? So Rav came along and said, Ibal in only if there was Bila, only if there was relations. It doesn't happen automatic. Interesting what Rashi says, automatic means that it's retrospective. We say that the Kedushin that she did as a minor now kicks in and becomes Mehatera, which is a big Kiddush. But anyway, so Rav said that, that after she becomes an adult, they have to have relations again. And that relations is for the purpose of marriage Mehatera. The Gemara said it seems to be an argument between Rav and Shmuel. Rav says, and the case there is talking about here, that a young girl, a minor, that did not do miyun, she grew up, and she married somebody else. Rav says you don't need a get. So we asked the question, it seems from there, Rav says you don't need a get from the second person because she's already married to the first person because she's an adult. Sounds like it's automatic, not the way we just said before. Rav said that you have to have another relation to make it a marriage, a proper marriage. Shmuel says you do need a get from the second person because she's not automatically married, the way you understood. She's not automatically married to the first person, and therefore she's not married to the second one. At least you need a get from the second one. So the top of the page, my love, we're assuming now that this case that I just mentioned to you is talking about the loybal, it's automatic, there was no relations, and yet Rav says that she's considered married to the first man and she does not require a get from the second one. Loy says, no, the ball, talking about a case here where they actually had Bia after she came a bas mitzvah, and therefore she's married to the first. So the obvious question is, so how do we understand Shmuel? If she's married to the first that had Bia, if she's married to the first, why, if another guy comes along and gives her, something for marriage, she's considered she needs to get from the second person? What for? She's already a married woman. She's already accounted for. Says the Gemara, either ball, my time with the Shmuel, if she's talking about they already had relations and she's not considered married because they consummated the marriage to the first person. So what Shmuel say that she still requires a get from the second one? She was a married woman. Says the Gemara, Kasavari holds, called Haboyel. Al-Das Kedushin Harishin Huboil. Now, this is a very interesting concept, and that is that Shmuel's of the opinion that that when does B only works if you had in mind that this should be to consummate a marriage. So according to Rav, when they become 12 years old and they have a marriage relation, the very first relation after they became 12 years old, after they became 12 years old, is they had in mind this is going to be for the sake of marriage. Shmuel says no. Shmuel says they continue on the same course, thinking that they're already married, so they had no special intention with this bia to make it into a marriage, and therefore she's still really only a minor, like a minor, even though she's over 12 years old, because they didn't have any special kavanah. This principle, if kol haboyel al das kedushin haboyel, is used in many things. We'll learn a little bit, learn in Gittin as well, but it's used, let's say, for example, in halacha. If somebody gets married civilly and they live together, husband and wife, in halacha, they consider married. Because what are the, how did they get married from the Torah's perspective? There's no kedushin, no witness, nothing. The only way is through bia. But the question is, when they had bia, when they have relations, did they have in mind that this relation should be for the sake of marriage? So you can argue, yes, or you can argue, no, they thought they'd already married, legally married. They didn't think that they're going to have, somehow this is going to consummate their marriage. Same idea. Anyway, Shmuel holds that they're continuing and they had no special intention, thinking that they're already married, so therefore they're not considered married. Says, well, if that's the principle they're arguing, why bother arguing again in this case, in the case where the Tana then took Kedushin for somebody else? Well, the very principles already argued before. We learned, Kitchav tonight, let's say a man and a woman got engaged on the condition that she, for example, has no major flaws that can unravel the marriage. or she has no vows that she made that can actually affect their relationship. And then the concert, they get married, they got married. Rav said, and turned out to be, and later on they found out that yes, she had a vow that she will never cook, which affects directly their marriage or something like that. Rav says, tzrichei meneget. Rav says, doesn't matter. You're married now, you need a divorce. Why are you married? Because when you had bia, you said, Amoichel the Tanai, we're now fully married regardless. So therefore, we see that you had in mind kedushin, you had in mind marriage, but the first time you had tashmish. And Shmuel says, "Ein tzrichei meneget." Well, you don't need it. Why? Because the marriage unravels, because all the time that you people had that this couple had tashmish, they were continuing their first thing. He was still relying on the first kedusha that they made in the beginning. Rav, so once they got married, he's Michael the tonight is no more tonight. It's a full-blown marriage. So now, if you want a divorce, you need a proper divorce. Shmuel says, you don't need to get. You know why? Because anybody who does bila is doing it on the basis of the first. He's continuing the first thing, still continuing with the tanai that what do you call that? There's no movement there, there's no neder, assuming that there isn't any, and therefore he didn't have any new special kavanah when he had tashmish. So why do you have to argue the same principle twice? We don't argue for nothing unless there's a nuance in each one that the other one doesn't have. So yes, we need both. And the Gemara explained, but Rashi's gears in the Gemara is different than our Gemara, so I'll just do Rashi's gears. It's slightly different. The eat Bahi, if we only knew that case, actually, Bahi Rav says, you know why? Mishum, what do you call it? The Loimina. In other words, Rav, not that the could have a Rami. Rav says, in the case, we would have thought if we only had the argument about a katana, and became 12 years old. Over there, Rav says that you had definitely had in mind marriage when you had relations after 12 years old. You know why? Because everyone knows that a 9-year-old is not married to you Mahatera. You knew that she wasn't married to you Mahatera. So therefore, when you became 12 years old, you became an adult, you definitely had in mind that this should be the marriage, you consummated it. And that's why if another person comes along and gives kedushin, don't worry about it. But in the case of a Tanai, you're going to, maybe Rav agrees to Shmuel, you assume that there's nothing wrong with this marriage. You got married properly and she made it Tanai, or you made it Tanai, and she said, yeah, no problem. So you assume that there's no problem. So therefore, you didn't have a special kavanah when you had your first relation that I'm moichel any Tanai that she made. You assume that there's no problem, there's no movement there, there's no neder. So maybe Rav agrees to Shmuel. Is over is Ahiba Rav Hikam Rav Bishum what do you call it? How you tana. The kivin the ball and therefore ball Hashem kedushin. I'm doing it the way Rashi learned. That way Al Gemara says. But in the case of the Tanai, maybe he's made it to Shmuel that definitely he assumes that the kedushin was valid and there's no nedarim there, there's no movement there, and therefore he doesn't have a special kavanah when they have relations. The Yidma Bahawi this one, I would say Bahakam. He only argues in the case of the Tanai. Abba Bahak, but in the case of Ketana. In the case of Tani, even Shmuel maybe is made to Rav, saying, look, everyone knows that 9-year-olds are married from the Torah. Therefore, probably when she became 12 years old, the man had in mind that this should be proper kedushin. Maybe Shmuel agrees. That's why we need both. We need both. Okay. Says the Gemara. So me, Amarav, did Rav actually say? That all depends whether they consummate the marriage after they become an adult, after she becomes old or not. Well, there was a story that in the city of Nodash, a girl was engaged when she was and married when she was a young minor with Godler. We're talking about all these things that with the Rabbanon is through the sisters, through the siblings of the mother. And but Oisa Beit Kursaya, they put her on the special chariot that they have for Kalos when they bring them to the house. This is part of the wedding ceremony. And usually the chuppah takes place before they have marital relations. So what happened was she became an adult, and it sounds like they had no relations since then because now they're being led like sort of as a marriage, like a marriage canopy or a special kind of a chariot for a marriage. But while she was driving, being taken to the place for the marriage, or to consummate the marriage and all that, somebody else came along, convinced her to marry him. And there was 2 students there of Rav. Rabbeinu and Chananel will assume automatically that they're going to follow the ways of their teacher Rav. So they said, even though the other person proposed and gave a condition, don't worry about it, ignore it. Why? Because you're fully married to the first person. would be fully married, but they didn't have yet tashmish since she became an adult. And Rav said before, it has to be tashmish. Omar Papa said a Papa. Bin Norash, for two answers we'll have. A Papa answers, in Norash, main they're the custom was just opposite. First they had relations and then they had the party. So therefore they already consummated, and that's why they ruled that they consummated the marriage and they're 100% married to the first person. So the second person we discount. Rav Ashi says no. No, they do like everybody else. First you have the chuppah and everything else, and then you consummate it. But Rav Ashi says that second person, they did the wrong thing. It's quite an abhorrent act what he did. A girl is being led to the chuppah and everything else, comes along another guy, and on the way while she's going and tries to snatch her away and seduce her, whatever he did there. Rav Ashi, who was the guy did the wrong thing. We decided to do the wrong thing as well. We're going to go outside the norm, and we're going to make sure it doesn't work. That this kind of behavior, so promiscuous, is not going to work. So what we did was we completely removed the kedushin from that person. So the second person kedushin should have been valid because she was only married to Rabbana. They didn't yet consummate it, but because what he did was just so abhorrent, we decided kedushin won't work. Why not? Rashi says the reason is, could be a little before. When you get married, everyone says kedas Moshe v'Yisrael. We gave it over to the hands of the rabbis, and therefore it's up to the rabbis if they allow this kedushin to take place or not. Tosha says, not sure if that's the reason why here. Maybe the reason here is because the rabbis have a power to overturn things of the Torah in a passive way. Says him what further. Okay, because makes sense. The rabbi came along and said, "Look, the money you gave, the silver that you gave, whatever it was, is now hefker. So as if he didn't give her anything. Because be my. What about in the case where in the store, let's say he had the girl for the night and they had relations? How can the rabbanon undo that?" One answer, Shavia Rabban will be lost if it's news. This is a bigger chiddush. The rabbi said that relation turns in from a marriage into just promiscuity. The halach is like Rabbi Lezer, the halach like Rabbi Lezer, which is what? That we encourage the girl to be mamayan, to walk out, so therefore to let the other woman go ahead and do be a yibum. Rabbi Lezer, we do mean. Even though we learned before about kapara said you should avoid mean, but we said this is for mitzvah, therefore we encourage it. Mishnah. Okay, and we're going to have numerous cases here in the next parak about if a person was married to a minor, which is only the Rabbanon, or if he's married to someone who is deaf and mute, and therefore it's also a marriage only with the Rabbanon, versus sometimes in marriage, there's two wives, one of them is a pikachas, full-fledged, full capacity, and one of them is a minor. And what happens with the Yavam? Which one has to remember? If there's two wives, one of them gets married, the other one is scot-free. Which one should get married? Which one should get chalitza? We also learned before that you cannot give chalitza to a deaf and mute person because you have to say the psukim. And even though if you don't say the psukim, it's not the end of the world, but if you have to be able to say the psukim, and they cannot, even a mute person cannot receive or give chalitza because they cannot say the psukim. So there'll be a number of things that is going to be a bit convoluted the next few days. Just giving you a heads up. Okay, Mishnah. We'll start with case number one. If somebody is married to two Yisaymas Ktanas, if someone is married to two Yisaymas Ktanas, Umeis. So Reuben was married to two women, they were both minors, and he died. So they're both the same level. Both wives are both midirabanan. So therefore, bi'asa or chalitzasa shel achas mehem. If the brother Shimon either marries or gives chalitza to one of them, then the co-wife, because they're both in this on par, is now free. Patelet tzarasa. It releases her; she is free. V'chein likewise, the same case would be shtei charshas. The two women that were deaf and mute, same thing. We're deaf and dumb, exactly the same thing. Why? Because they're on the same level. They're both with the Rabbanon, so you could give a chalitza or even to either one, the other one gets free. What about if one was a ketana and one was a chareshes? One was a minor and one was a chareshes, and so even though they're both with the Rabbanon, they are not on par, as the Gemara will explain.
If she's deaf mute, how can she do chalitza?
Sorry?
But you said we can't.
Very good. The Gemara will ask that question. Excellent. The Gemara will ask. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, what happened? You were married to a Ktan and Chereshes, even though they're both with the Rabbanon, they're two different Isurim or different mitzvahs Rabbanon. Then, and we'll Gemara explain why. Ein bias achas mehen poiteres rasa. Here, each one requires their own release. You cannot use one release for both, even though they're both with the Rabbanan and they're both, you would think, on par. Maybe they're not, as we'll see in the Gemara. Okay, next case, pikacha, so someone full-fledged, somebody who's an adult and just an ordinary adult, and the chareshes. So Reuben was married to two women. One was a full-fledged wife, the pikachas, and one was midrabanan, the one who was deaf. Bias hapikachas. So if the brother, and then he dies, if Shimon goes ahead and does something with the pikachas, which is the main wife, then potet the chareshes, the co-wife, the chareshes, which is only midrabanan, Reuben's wife, surely she is released. The aim be the chareshes, but if you go ahead and you decide to marry the chareshes, so midrabanan, you have a mitzvah, you yibum with her, but it does not poiteres as hapikacha, does not release the wife who was mahatira married to Reuven. She needs her own thing. What happens? Reuven was married to two women. One was an adult and one was a minor. So the same thing. Principle is bias hagdoila poiteres aktana. If you do something with the gdoila, it releases the ktana, but the ain't bias tana gdoila. But the bias ktana does not release the gdoila because the ktana is only married to Rabbanan, and therefore the Torah doesn't recognize her marriage in the first place. So by Shimon marrying her, it has no bearing on the yibum of the gdoila. So the Gemara's first question is what we just asked a minute ago. You say the same thing applies to chareshes. The chareshes bal chalitza. How can you give chalitza to a chareshes? Since they cannot say the psukim, you cannot do chalitza. But now, didn't we learn previously cheresh and nechlat? A cheresh who received chalitza, or cheresh shecholtza, or the woman was cheresh that gave the chalitza, and the chalitza mean hakotten, or you take a chalitza from a someone who's the guy is under bar mitzvah, chalitza sapsula. All these cases, the chalitza is possible. We said possible because it disqualifies the other brothers from deciding to marry them, but there's no chalitza. I want to get over that. You're right. The first answer is abiyah. When we said the same thing applies to people who are deaf and mute, we're talking about biyah of one of them releases the other, not regarding chalitza. When it came to two Yisayim Miktanas, you have a choice, biyah chalitza. When it came to cheresh, only biyah will work, only relation, not chalitza. Rava comes along and gives a different answer. And this is what we're going to be discussing today's Gemara. Rava comes along and says there's two kinds of chereshes. In other words, it depends on the level of her marriage. In other words, like this. If she was a cheresh when she got married, which means the whole marriage is only midrabanan, and now her husband died, she's still a cheresh, then you could give chalitza to her. Rava wants to say, you know why? Because since the rabbanon are the ones who got her married in the first place, then the same rabbanon can come along and say, we're going to release her from any bond to her brother-in-law through chalitza. But if she got married when she was an ordinary person in control of all faculties, so she was married mahatira, then over time she became a cheresh, she lost her ability to hear and speak. Then, in that case, you cannot do chalitza because mahatira, she's a married woman. And now, mahatayda, she has to marry her brother-in-law, and chalitza won't do because she cannot say the psukim. That's the chiddush that Rava is going to make. So Rava is going to say, in this mission over here, when the mission says charesh, the same thing applies. Harsha is even chalitza will work because we're talking about over here. They were married when they were a cheresh, and since when they got married, she couldn't speak. Everything was done by sign language. So sign language will work for chalitza as well. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Amar, if you take chalitza, if she was a cheresh from the beginning, then you could make chalitza. Here she was an ordinary adult when she got married, and then she became deaf and mute. And the Gemara explains, cheresh is mekar if she was always a cheresh, just like she got married, she wasn't married only with Rabbanan, and they use sign language, and we consider that marriage is hachin nafik. That's the exact same way she's going to get out of that marriage. In other words, now she's bound to her brother Shimon, her brother-in-law Shimon, but sign language will do, but that's how she got married in the first place. If she was an adult, which means that mahataydu she's married to Reuben, and the achakachnas kasher only afterwards loy. The ma'akva bakriya, she can't. Mahataydu, she is bound now to Shimon, and she can't do anything. They can't get released because she can't speak. She can't say those psukim. Okay. Comes along. Abaye is going to ask a number of questions on Rabbi because this new chiddush making a distinction that depends if you were always a chiddush or only now. Sorry.
No, I'm trying to understand that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Harvey, mute your microphone. Harvey,
have to
mute your
take-
microphone.
Esrei Abaya comes along Abaya and asks the following question. The Charesh is miyakara. You're telling me that if she was a Charesh from the outset, Bas Chalitzi, she can make Chalitza. So let me ask you a question. Latanan, we learned, we're going to learn later on, Shnei Achim, there were two brothers. Echad Pikeach, we're going to learn a number of cases where either one man was married to two women and how it affects the brother-in-law, or there were two brothers married, each one was married to a different woman. And in that itself, we're going to have two possibilities. Either these two women were just strangers to each other, or these two women were actually sisters to each other, which obviously is a problem because you cannot live with your wife's sister. So generally speaking, your wife's sister, she's exempt from Yibum, she goes free. But we'll see what happens if one is Chayv Ma'atera, one is Chayv Midrabanan, all of these cases. So, come along to the next mission. It says, two brothers, Reuven and Shimon, one brother, Reuven, was an ordinary adult, and Shimon was a Chedesh. And they were married to two women, not sisters, not related. Achas Pikachas, Achas Chereshes. Reuven was married, Reuven the Pikach was married to Pikach. Reuven was married Mahatera to Leah. And Shimon was married to Rachel, non-related Leah Rachel, and married with the Rabbanon because they were both a Chedesh. Now let's see the possibilities. Meis Chedesh Bal Chedeshes. Let's say Shimon, who was only married to Rabbanon, died. Now, Ma Yase Pikeach Bal Pikacha. What does Reuven do with Shimon's wife? Well, he cannot give her chalitza. Remember, because a Chereshes can't have chalitza. So what do you do? Kindness. He can marry her, and then now. That's the only way she can get out. And if he wants to divorce her. But that's how you set her free. However, what happens now? Why is it that you can what do you call it? Divorce her? Because since she got married through sign language, you can also end the marriage through sign language. Okay. What about Reuven is going to die? Reuven's married Mahatayla to this woman, and she is now Mahatayla. She is now has to marry Shimon, or she has to do something with Shimon, her brother-in-law. And Shimon's married to a woman only Midrabanan, and he can only marry Midrabanan because he is a Chedesh. So what happens in this case? What can he do? He can't give chalitza because he cannot speak. But what could he do? Kindness, he marries her, but he can never divorce her. He can never divorce her because he doesn't have the ability to divorce. She is Mahatayla. She's Mahatayla bound to Shimon. So therefore, he marries her. That's all she can do. But and he can never divorce her.
Why can't he divorce her?
Because he's a Chedesh. A Chedesh, we learn a deaf and dumb can't give a divorce. Says the Gemara, my love, what kind of case are we talking about here? Now, you can argue that we're talking about over here, Abai automatically assumes if you don't make a distinction, we're talking about a normal case. Generally, a Chedesh, when everything talks about a Chedesh, you're talking about somebody who's born that way, born deaf and mute. So I'm assuming the same thing here. My love, we're talking about somebody who's deaf and mute, and yet, Uktani, and it says, kindness in Chaylas. You, Rabbi, said that if somebody was born that way, says you could give them chalitza because if they can get married, you can end the marriage through sign language. It says here that the only alternative is to with the Chadeshes is to marry her. Can't give her chalitza. Tony Kain is in Chaylas life. So Rabbi said that's not a problem. Who told you we're talking about somebody born this way? Like this is talking about a case. I'm going to argue that this case in the Mishnah is talking about somebody who started out healthy. Therefore, she was married. She was married Mahatayda to Shimon, and she was a pekachas, and then she became deaf and dumb, and therefore you cannot give her chalitza. That's why Reuven has to marry her. Okay, Toshma Rabbi continues. It says in the same Mishnah. What about two intelligent brothers, Reuven and Shimon, the Suyin Shteinochias, married two women totally unrelated. Reuven married a Pikeach, Shimon married a Chedesh. No, Reuven married Mahatayda, Shimon only married with the Rabbanon because he married a woman that is Chedeshes. Meis Pikeach Bala Chedeshes. What happens if the Pikeach died? The husband of the Chadesh, Shimon, who was married to Chadesh, only married to Rabbanon, he died. So now Reuven has the onus of Tisma Rabbanon to marry Shimon's wife. Mayase Pikeh Babakak, what should he do? He cannot give her a chalitza because she's a chareshes. So kindness, he marries her. But if he wants to divorce her, he can divorce her. If he wants, he can divorce her. What about Mace Pikeh Babakak? What about Reuven died, who was married Ma'atayda, and now his wife has to marry Shimon, and Shimon's a healthy person, so he can marry her. Mayase Pikeh Babakak. What should the Shimon do? He has a choice. Since Shimon is an ordinary adult, so with Reuven's wife, he can either marry her or give her chalitza. Now, we're going to make assumption here. Since when you say somebody's a pekech, it means from birth. Usually a pekech means from birth. And then we're talking about a pekech and a chareshes. Obviously, everything here is from birth. So we see that even though it's from birth, and yet what do we say that Reuven does with Shimon's wife, the chareshes? He has to marry her. He can't give her chalitza. So we see that even someone from birth is a chareshes. You can never give her chalitza because you can't say the psukim. It doesn't matter that she's only married with Rabbanon and therefore they can say how chalitza is, chalitza is good enough. You can't say anything. Not like Rabba. My lab the who pekech mikara, since he's a pekech is usually birth. He now mecharesh is mekadosh from birth. And it says kindness in chaylis light that all you can do is marry the chareshes, but you can. There's no option of giving her chalitza, even though her whole marriage was based on sign language. So why can't you end the marriage, which in this case is chalitza with sign language? It doesn't work that way. Not like Rabba. So Gemara says again. Rabba will say, "Who said mida iria?" Does it say that you compare the two, the pekech and the cheresh in this situation? How can each one's different? The pekech, obviously from birth. The cheresh is talking about it happened later on in life, after she got married. And that's why you cannot give her a chalitza. She got married, and therefore you can't give her a chalitza. Says, okay, I'll bring a third part, and from this third part, Abai is going to try to prove. Since over here, definitely, we're talking about a cheresh from birth. Therefore, it's all in the same Mishnah. Therefore, the first cases, the two cases in the Mishnah probably is the same. And therefore, they're all talking about from birth, and yet you see you cannot give chalitza to this cheresh, even though she was a cheresh from birth and her whole marriage was only through sign language. Nevertheless, you cannot give chalitza. That will be my question to Rabbi. What's the story here? Shall ask a question. It says, there were two brothers. She had Reuben and Shimon. Reuben was an adult, and Shimon was a cheresh. Now we're introducing a new variable. They married two sisters. Leah and Rachel were sisters. Achas Pekachas, the Achas Chareshes, so Reuben was married to a Pekech, and married Mehatera, and Shimon, the Chedesh, married the sister, which is only Rabban. Now, what happened to Meis Chedesh Bar Chareshes? What happened when Shimon died? So his wife, Midrabbanan, the Chareshes, Midrabbanan has to marry Reuben, but the thing is that her sister is Reuben's wife. So she walks out free. She walks out free because her sister is a married woman to Reuven. Okay. But what about the other way around? And here's the problem. Because if Reuven died, his wife Mahatayra now is bound up to marry Shimon. But Shimon is midrabbanan married to Leah's sister, to Rachel. So what do we do in this instance? What can you do here? He cannot give chalitza because he can't say the psukim. The only thing he can do is marry Reuben's wife, but he can't marry Reuben's wife because he's married to Rachel, Leah's sister. So what he does is, first thing is, he needs to divorce his own wife. He needs to divorce his own wife, so it's no longer married to Leah's sister. And then
we just said a minute ago that a cheresh can't give a get. Is it?
Sorry. To his own wife, he can give a get. His own wife, he's only married to Rabbanah. If a cheresh marries a chereshes, they're only married to Rabbanah. Of course, he can give a get. A cheresh cannot give a get to someone that is married Mahatayra, for example, to Reuven, and now he marries her. He cannot give her a get. So to his own wife, Rachel, he needs to give her a divorce because now his wife is the sister of his zika, his sister-in-law Mahatayra. He has to marry because it's his sister-in-law. Her husband died childless. So therefore, he has no choice but to divorce his wife. He cannot live with the sister of the one that Mahatayra he must marry. So he must divorce his existing wife, right? His existing wife. Now, what happens with Reuben's wife? He cannot give her chalitza because he's a chayt. He can't give chalitza. Nor can he marry his Reuben's wife. Why not? Because she's the sister of his divorced wife. And you cannot marry your divorced wife's sister. So he cannot marry either Reuben's wife. So therefore, okay. He continues. Sorry, wrong place. So therefore, H is Achiv. She's stuck. She's in limbo. What do you mean? She cannot go free because no chalitza. She cannot marry Shimon because her sister was married to Shimon, and therefore cannot marry Shimon either. She's the sister of a divorcee of an ex-wife of Shimon, and therefore cannot marry. So the Gemara says, okay.
Why is he divorcing his own wife?
Because
if he can't do anything with the sister, then why is he divorcing his own wife?
Divorcing his own wife is because now from the Torah's perspective, he must marry his sister-in-law, which means that from the Torah's perspective, he's living with a woman who is the sister of the one that he has to marry. That not only has to marry, he already has a bond to. Remember, we have a zika. As soon as Reuben died, automatically there's a bond between Shimon and Leah. And he cannot live with a woman who is the sister of that bond. And remember, the Torah doesn't recognize his connection with his wife. They're both a cheresh. So it's only Rabbanan. So therefore, from the Torah perspective, he's living with a woman, or he wants to marry or live with a woman that is the sister of someone that Mahatayr is already connected to. So he must divorce his own wife. But he cannot marry Reuben's wife, so she is in limbo. She's asur la'olam. Can't do anything about it. Okay, now here it says again. It says here that what does Reuben do with Shimon's wife? It says over here that he marries his wife. It doesn't say anything about chalitza, and it doesn't marry chalitza at all. And l'chayre, we're talking about somebody from birth, and yet it doesn't give you the option of giving chalitza to the cheresh. It says the Gemara. You can tell me we're talking about a case again, like Robert answered till now. We're talking about somebody who was all right, and then they became deaf. How can, if the man, you're going to tell me that this man was healthy, and therefore they get married, and then afterwards he became deaf, so on, and that's why he cannot give a chalitza. It says, if that's the case, how can he divorce his wife? If they were married mahatayra, if you're telling me that he became a cheresh after they got married, so mahatayra was married to his wife, then how can you tell me that he should divorce his wife? Now that he's a cheresh, since they're married mahatayra, he doesn't have the capacity to give a divorce to a woman that is married mahatayra. The only reason why we allow a cheresh to divorce his wife is because they're only both married with the Rabbanan. But if you can tell me we're talking about a pekeach here, and then after they became a cheresh, then he cannot give or get. So must be talking about a case over here that he was a cheresh from the beginning, and so was she, and therefore they're only married with the Rabbanan, and therefore he can give a divorce to his wife. So once we've proven that in this case here, cheresh is from birth, because that's the only way he can divorce his wife. Then we look at the first two cases of the same Mishnah, and we're going to assume that they're all the same. We're talking about in all cases of a cheresh or birth, and goes back to our original question, not from here, but our original question, the first two proofs that Abai brought, that there we see that he doesn't have the option of chalitza, but if it's born from birth, why can't you give chalitza there to the cheresh? It does not prove, when it comes to cheresh, it makes no difference if it's from birth or it happened later on. Now, why can't you say that it happened later on out of birth? Because how can he divorce his wife? But now we learn this chasha. If let's say she became, let's say after they got married, they were married mahatayr, and then she became deaf and mute yaitzi. Since when it comes to divorce, according to the Torah, before Rabbi Gesher came along and said you need her consent. In the olden days, he can unilaterally divorce her. So therefore, it doesn't matter whether she agrees or she doesn't agree. If we don't need a consent, then it doesn't matter if she's a cheresh. You can always divorce her. The stat is, if however she lost her mind, lo yaitzi, you cannot divorce her because we're worried about her health, and we're worried about who's going to take care of her. If you're going to just divorce her, how is she going to take care of herself? People take advantage of her. So that's with the Rabbanan. We don't want the divorce to be valid. Nizcharesh who on the shtat, but if he became a cheresh, he became a sheiter, lo yaitzi lamas, he can never give a divorce because they're married mahatayra, and now he's a cheresh. He's no longer able to give a divorce because he's married mahatayra, but since he does not have the full cognizance, he's not fully aware of what he's doing. Does not have the capacity to give a divorce. So it must be that it's come out from birth. So I'm going to assume that everything else come out from birth. And Abaye concludes his question. Since he definitely was from birth, we'll assume that she's the same boat because we constantly equate the two. Same thing. Since case number 3, they're both from birth, then Noch is not Cherosh Mikara. In the previous cases, when they weren't sisters, are also talking about from birth. Utanan Gabi Noch, and we learned clearly in the first two proofs that I brought, it says Kainis in the only choice you have to do with the Cheresh is to marry her and then divorce her. Of a Chaylis you cannot give a Chalitza. So doesn't that prove that even from birth, it does, and she only got married with the Rabbanon, you cannot end it with Chalitza. You have to say the Psukim sign language is not going to do. Not like Rabba's Chiddush. Ishtik. So Rabba was quiet. Others say it's Rabba. Rabba was quiet. He also the comment Rabbi Yosef when it came before Rabbi Yosef. When it came before Rabbi Yosef said to Abaya the following. He said to him, my time at Toysim, why did you ask these questions? They're all weak questions. The Yochel Shnilach, he could have answered simply. What the Rabbi could have answered you was that no, who told you to make that leap? Because one case is talking about they were deaf and dumb from birth, that all the cases are the same. Who said? For argument's sake, he can say, Achoy is Charash is Mikara, and Nachabikr is Bakar is Chashu. And he can tell you the last case is talking about with from birth, but the first two cases are talking about what happened later on in life. But if they were from birth, since they got married with the Rabbanon through sign language, they can have Chalitza sign language. Your proof is not a valid proof. But if you really want to ask him a question, this is what you should have asked. You should have asked him the following question. It's not often that we have Rabbi Yosef outgunning Abaya. But he said to Abaya, if you really want to have a question, you should ask him from the following Mishnah. It says in the same Mishnah, the following case. Well, the next Mishnah, Shnei Achim, two brothers, Charoshin, two brothers that were deaf and dumb. Nesuyin, they were married, Shtei Achayes Pikchas. So two brothers were married to two adult women. Or Shtei Achayes Charoshes, or doesn't matter, or married to two sisters. But the main thing is the two brothers married to two sisters, who were also both deaf and dumb. So they're all either way, they're all married with the Rabbanon. Or Shtei Achayes, or there were two sisters, Acha Pikachas, Acha Chereshes. Or there were two sisters. One was adult and one was a cheresh. But the thing is, there were two brothers, and both brothers were a cheresh. The chein shtei achis, two sisters charoshes, or another case, two sisters that both girls were charoshes were married to shtei achis pichin. They were married to two brothers who were adults, full-fledged adults. Two brother charoshes, but both sisters were charoshes. All of these are only married with Rabbanon. All of these cases, what are called? They're all pot mina chalitza mina yibum. They're all pot from chalitza and from yibum. They're all pot, but why? Because they're all on level, all midrabanan, and whichever one dies, it's her sister who's married to her brother-in-law. And what happens when somebody's sister is married to her brother-in-law? She's automatically exempt. And because they're all on par, they're all midrabanan. We don't have the situation we had before where one was Mahat Torah married and one was only midrabanan. They're all midrabanan in all of these scenarios. So therefore, her sister is married. She just walks out. But the imhaya nachrias, what happened? They weren't sisters, which means there's a full din of yibum in this case. And one of them, one husband died, let's say Reuben died in all of these cases, then not a problem. Then Yichnusu, Shimon has to marry that Yevama, and then if he doesn't want to, he can divorce her. But there's no option of Chalitza. But if he wants to divorce, but there's no option of Chalitza here. Now, let's analyze this for a second. Hey, Chidam, what are we talking about? So Rabbah will tell you, we're talking about a case, why it's not option? Because when they got married, they were all intelligent, so therefore they're married Ma'at Torah. And now Chalitza wasn't worth, but if they would have been from birth, then only married Rabban, Chalitza would. That's what Rabbah would say. Let's analyze. Hey, Chidam, what are we talking about? We can learn like Rabbah generally learned that they started out being intelligent and then later on they became deaf and mute. Then how can you give a divorce? It says he give a divorce. There's an option of marrying and giving a divorce. Now remember, to give a divorce, you can only be married with Rabbanan. But if they were Pikeach, when they were married to the first husband, if they were married as a Pikeach, that means they're married Mahat Torah. And then you marry her, there's a continuation of the Torah, you can't give her a divorce because you cannot give a divorce to someone that's bound to you from the Torah. You can only give a divorce to someone that's bound for you, the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon are lenient. But when it comes to the Torah, you have to be in full control of your faculties, and a Cheresh is not. So how can it be talking about over here that you can give a divorce? Must be talking about that they're all deaf, they're all Chereshes from birth, and therefore they're only married mid-Rabbanon. Nobody's married him at Torah, and that's why you can divorce her. And yet it says you cannot give chalitza. Clearly, when it comes to a chedesh, it makes no difference from birth or not from birth. You cannot give a chalitza because they cannot express themselves and say the psukim. But now we learn, they can never give a get. The lab acharoshim mikara, but from birth. Since the men are born from birth, charoshes, obviously the women are the same because it doesn't make a distinction. Uktani says clearly, if they're not related, yichnusu should marry them. Yichnusu in, you only have the option of marrying, and then if you want to give divorce, there's no option of giving chalitza. Even though they're only married with Rabbanan, they were married through sign language. You cannot end that yibum through sign languages. To yufta de Rabba, to yufta. This completely repudiates what Rabba has to say. Okay, continue. The Gemara continues, Ketana v'chareshes, if somebody was married to two women, one is a Ketana, so one was a minor, and one was a chareshes, even though they're only both married.
Can we say a few blood ago that not being able to say the psukim is not miyakev? All you have to do is perform chalitza, you remove the shoe.
Excellent question. And the same few blood ago, the Gemara answered that question. Do you remember? The Gemara answers, Kid Rab Zera. Rab Zera said, if Misha ro lebila ein bila makevis, Misha ein ro lebila makevis, which means when you donate 61 measures to a carbon mincha, and a pot, the maximum size of a pot is 60 esrainim. So we say you have to bring in two separate pots. Even why? Because you have to mix it. Now, even though if you bring a carbon and you don't mix the flour over, you don't mix it, it's still valid. So who cares? Put the 61 in one pot. Says Rab Zayda. As long as it has a potential to be mixed, that's good enough. Okay, so therefore, my psukim is the same thing. You have to be able to say it. Otherwise, no.
And if they're deaf mute, they can't say it.
Exactly. Therefore, because they can't say it, that's why it's disqualified. That's why you cannot use chalitza is not an option. Because they can't. Okay. Now
being able to say it that is miyakev.
If you're able, then it's not ma'akev. If you're unable,
what is ma'akev is if you're not able to say it. Whether you said it or not doesn't make a difference.
Exactly. That's why we said even an Elan, even an intelligent person who just lost the ability to speak, cannot do chalitza. Says the Gemara. So when the Mishnah said a Ketana and a Chareshes, if you have a Ketana and a Chareshes, if you give Chalitza to one, it does not release the other one. Even though they're both Midrabana, it doesn't release. The Gemara wants to know why not. If you had two Ketanas, you give the Chalitza to one, releases the other one, or you marry one, releases the other one. Why not a Ketana and a Chareshes? Says the Gemara. Nachman said, I once found that Abba bar Abba or Rab Chana, Abba bar Abba and Rab Chana Chasna, his son Rab Chana, they were sitting there, the Yosef was sitting, they were sitting there out there in public, and a bunch of students gathered around them, and they were having discussions and all listening in to their conversation, including myself. Beshuka de Pumpadisa in the marketplace, Pumpadisa, as you do in a marketplace, the Amri, this is what they said. How do you understand our Mishnah? Why is it if you gave a chalitza to the Tana, it's not effect or beer, it doesn't release the other one, the chedesh? Why doesn't it release the other one? Hani mili, and this is talking about a case. The Nafla Lema Achi, we're talking about a case that Reuben was married to a Tana and to a chedesh. And Shimon, and then Reuben dies, so now Shimon has to do something. He has to do something with both of them. He cannot do it with one. Why not? Because the Hanamila, the Nafli Ma'achiv, it fell from his brother Pikeach, who was a Pikeach, and therefore, since his brother was a Pikeach, we don't know which one he favored more. Now, this is a very interesting thing. Very interesting thing. If you have two wives, and they're not your wives Mahatayda, only Midrabanan, there is like a degrees, like a strata. Which one do you favor more? And that's one is sort of becomes your primary wife, and the other one becomes your secondary. If you're married, Mahatayda, those are things the primary and the secondary. But if you're married Midrabanan, there's the primary and the secondary. Which is as follows. We don't know which is the primary, which is secondary. Would he rather, is the primary the Tana minor? Or or is the Charesh? What's the two sides of a coin? Because right now she's a minor, but eventually soon she'll become an adult, to be a full-fledged, responsible, mature adult, and he has something to look forward to the rest of his life. On the other hand, maybe the Charesh, the Gdoili, Ubasbi. The question is, it's a general machlekes in among Tanoim Achreim as a principle. What I guess what's more important? What's more significant? What supersedes what? Today something small, or tomorrow something big? Which one supersedes the other one? You know, that's a general question. The many machlekes that revolve around this principle, and it's exactly what we have here. You have something small right now. She's a chedesh. She cannot do more than she can do. But however, she's an adult right now, and you enjoy the experience with an adult a lot more than you enjoy with a minor. The other one is a minor right now, but in the future she will become an adult, but should be also full capacity of all of her faculties. So what supersedes what? Which one will become which is his primary wife currently, and which is a secondary wife? Does it look at the future in a big way, or does it look at now? I don't care about the future right now. This is the better thing, even though it's small. So therefore, because we don't know which one it is, therefore, since we don't know which is the primary wife, you have to release each one separately. Both women, the Ketana and the Chedeshes. But let's say your brother. This is what the son-in-law, or this is what Nachman, Rav Adam Abba was saying to his son-in-law. However, let's say if the other way around, if Shimon was married to these two women, and he himself was a Chedesh as well, and he was married to these two women, then naturally we think that the Chedesh will gravitate to the Chedeshes, and in his life, he understands the Chedeshes a lot better, and therefore he will treat her as his primary wife. Surely that's his primary wife, the Bas Bihi. Why is she the primary wife? Because she's an adult, and also they understand each other. They're in the same ilk. I mean, that's what they said. I mean, I said to them, Nachman saying, and I said to them, I don't know if you're right. Even the brother, the Chedesh, can go through, the same debate within himself, because the minor one day will grow up, or what it is today. So that's where we're up to. Says the Gemara. Keita Takanosim. The Gemara now starts a very complicated thing, and it goes on till the Mishnah. So I don't know if I should start it really, because if we start it, then he'll take over. It's going to be a bit complicated. It'll be right in the middle. So the bottom line, the Gemara is going to try to work out. So what do? Because you have two women now. Take care of. You have a Chedesh and you have a Ketana. What do? And remember, a Chedesh you cannot give a Chalitza to. So what do you do here? You have to do something to both of them, and you cannot marry both of them because you cannot marry two women from one household. We had before. So what do you do? And so as we'll see, it's not so simple. What do you do? So I think we'll leave it here, and because this starts a new sugya.